Hi, everyone. This is Dr. Alana James, and today's conversation is about CVs versus and resumes for master's and doctoral students. What they are, how they work, what is out there in the world, a general overview, and then we're going to end with some ideas about what makes for the winning ones. What are the top level of ideas that you want to have in your mind as you're putting together the documents that will get you your next job? All right, so our reflective questions today, and hopefully that we'll come back to these at the end, but hopefully they'll have meaning for you as you look into building your own CV and resume. To what extent do you think you know what the recruiters you face will be looking for? On a scale of 1 to 5 for the people in the room, with 5 being, yep, you got it, you know pretty much exactly, 3 being, and as I go on, maybe we'll see how those votes come in. So if you're in the room, if you would just type in your 1 to 5s, that'd be helpful. So there is the question of whether or not you know what your recruiters are looking for. There's also then how do you find out more about what they're looking for and what these should look like. This is obviously today is a good start, and you'll end today with more resources. And how do you prepare when the time comes? So only 1 vote came in, and Gary's pretty sure he knows what people are looking for. Our goals are to help you feel confident and get the job you yearn for when you graduate. Absolutely. You're taking some big things on with this academic work that you're doing, and we want it to pay off. Everybody wants it to pay off. And to help you understand beforehand what you're getting into. So at the end, you can tell me to what extent we made it to those goals. Our agenda, we're going to talk about the differences between the 2 kinds of documents. We'll look at some CVs, templates, and talk about where you might want to go. If that's your route, we're going to do the same thing for resumes. I want to do a critical one or the other, quick look at both, each and both, and then I'll get into some documents I found about winning resumes. Google being the company out there that has the most on the web, and we'll look at what some of those ideas are because I found them very provocative. Discussion time at the end. So our first snippet then is the difference between CVs and resumes. And there's 3 levels of difference: their length, their purpose, and their layout. So let's start with what they are. A CV, a curriculum vitae, which means the course of life, that should give you a sense of what they should be, is an in-depth document. It can be multiple pages long, and it contains a high level of detail about your achievements, but also about the things that make you you. And I think that's really important to keep in mind. It isn't just your academic work, but it should give an idea of what makes you the individual you are so that you will stand out, or people will know who they're talking to or when they look at your CV. It covers your education as well as accomplishments, publications, awards, honors, groups that you're part of, etc. A resume, on the other hand, is a concise document. You really want to hold it to 1 page, which is probably easier to do in Europe than it is in the US because your pages are smaller in the US. And it's intended not to dwell on what you've done, but to be really specific so that your reader knows how you are different from others in that big pile of resumes that they have to go through. So this is a quote: "The job seeker should adapt the resume to every position they apply for." It's not the same and you always send it out. It is in your interest to change it to tailor it, to really hone it to the specific post. It doesn't have to be ordered chronologically, and it doesn't have to cover your whole career. It's a very customizable document. Okay, so if we just shorten it, what's the difference between them? Length, purpose, and layout. Length, CVs are long, resumes are short. Purpose, CV shows off you and your whole life. Mostly is used for academic jobs in the United States and Canada, not for the rest of the non-academic work. In Europe, it's used for everything, and the rest of the world as well. Basically, you have to choose which one you're going to use depending upon the situation that you're in. Good to have them both. Resume, the purpose is to stand out from the rest. And we'll talk provocatively about what the kind of the high level thinking that goes into that at the end. And it's used for non-academic jobs if you're in the US or Canada. And we're going to go now into the layouts. So our second snippet is a look at CV templates. What to include? This is a grand list of things that you may want to have as headings in a CV. The order is generally highlighting the biggest things you've done. So if you're just finishing school and you haven't done much, you're going to highlight your education. If you are way past school, which school you went to is not as important as how many publications you have. So those are the general headings. And then your educational work tends to go, and that includes publications, tends to go before awards, honors, and the rest of your life. Teaching experience, research experience, lab experience, graduate field work. Don't forget those things. They're very important if you are just out of school and you don't have a lot on the publication side. You can fill in and be quite interesting on the other things. Don't forget languages and skills that you may have that are different from other people. In today's world, absolutely highlight anything you have going for you in terms of data, data integrity, data visualization, etc. Those skills are the ones that people don't have. And then this one is less specific to things like teamwork, creativity, etc. But if you think about those high-level skills that everyone needs to have, you can make sure you have something in the CV that you could discuss that points those out. We'll have a little bit more about that in a minute. So there are companies out there. It's a technological world, and a lot of people looking for work all the time. And so there's lots of things that you can use. And there is a template, a CV maker that helps you put in your stuff and add to it and fill in the boxes. And that might be easier than word processing it yourself. And there's a couple of, and the Zeddy one had particularly easy and some interesting ones visually. So it used to be the CV had to be Times New Roman and had to be certain everything, and that was the way it was. And you can still turn in a CV like that and nobody thinks about it, but you can also dress it up a little bit more. Typically, those CVs do not have the creativity that resumes have in terms of what they look like. This leads us to our third snippet, which is resume templates. Shorter list of what to include in a resume and some differences. So you probably wouldn't include your LinkedIn, ResearchGate, academia.edu in your CV, or it would be less usual to do so, but it's absolutely something you want to include in a resume. So they can look you up easily. If you make the cut past the pile of resumes to the top 10, then they are going to dig deeper before they decide who out of the top 10 they're actually going to call in for the interviews. It used to be, and some of the templates I'm about to give you still have career objective as one of the top things that you write about in a resume. And I think that might be a little old school because, as we'll see when we look at what works at places like Google, the recruiters are looking for you knowing them rather than them knowing you. And your career objective is while you're doing this, but the way you can help the job they have is what they want to see. So obviously, if you didn't think it would fit, hopefully you wouldn't even apply. So that's a question mark. Education, but small there. Your last degree, not every degree you've got. Your internship experience. And then when you get into experience, the questions are, what made you stand out at that job? Lots of people have those jobs. So what was your qualification? Why did you get a promotion? Same with skills, and we'll talk again later about what skills and how you put them in. Computer proficiency, again, data. Team leadership, also very important here. And you would put those under your career highlights. And then the rest is pretty self-explanatory. In a resume, you might want to include your personal interests. Hopefully, you'll wrap them into an experience if you can. And we'll see how one person did that in a little while later. But that's your general list to work with. Now, templates here. You'll see a lot of them have the same name. That's why I numbered them. That's a company who has a lot of different templates, some of which are more visually attractive. And so they broke those out in both a Word template and also a Photoshop template. So that may be helpful to you. Most of the companies on the web who do the template work, they want you to buy their service. They'll give you a few little bits to play with their system. And I think the advantage there, if you're going to look for work, is to put it in once and then to test out different templates, test out different looks. You don't have to keep word processing it. So I think probably for the small amounts that they charge, choose one that has the resume look that you want, and then think about it being a good investment for your future. But there are a number of things, and a blog at the bottom from a software engineer that was interesting as well. So then let's look into CVs and resumes critically. So when I put them up side by side and did a critical analysis of each, what I really saw, and there are a lot out there on the web, and people put up their resumes and their CVs, so it's not a difficult analysis to find enough to work on. And what I saw was that they really have pretty similar headings. There's a section usually on the resume that's an introduction, and I think that's the most significant part. I think that's taken the place of this career objective. And keep in mind that if you have 20 or 200 pieces of paper to go through as a recruiter, that intro is maybe all that they're going to read. So that's where you're going to put your most work. Just like when you finish your master's and your doctoral theses, you will put a lot of time into your abstract, because if your abstract doesn't work, they won't bother to pick up the rest of it. Same here with your intro. And the way you bring in LinkedIn, it can be very significant in some of these. So that's something to keep in mind. Then layouts, and if you're in different parts of the world, LinkedIn does have some competitors in some parts of the world. So you have to know who your people, who the organization that you're applying to, do they have a lot of employees on LinkedIn? If they do, then that's where you want to be. If they don't, then find out where they do. And if they are researchers and you're going for an academic job, look up ResearchGate and academia.edu and see how many people from those organizations are there. You want to be where they are. Make it easy. Layouts, obviously, I think it would make sense. The layouts can be much more visual on resumes. They can get quite creative, different colored backgrounds and those kind of things. You might want to put your picture on or not. I have kind of mixed feelings about that, but it is something to consider. And or maybe that's the link to LinkedIn, and then you have a really good picture on LinkedIn. CVs, definitely more inclusive. And actually what counts in CVs, the number of pages, the weight of the CV, as long as it's not just filler, shows that you've been around a while and that you've got quite a bit of expertise in your field. And hopefully those of you who are going for that kind of job are already going to conferences, having conference papers in, having the kinds of things you can do prior to graduation, prior to your first publication. Maybe sometimes it's easiest to publish first a literature review, and so that can get you started on a publications list, anything that sets you above. Now, here's the secret to both of these, which is still that getting a job is about who you know, and who they can call for the recommendation, or who will call them with a recommendation. So if you know of someone in the area and they're willing to write to whomever you're applying to and just say, you know, I know this person, they're worthy of an interview, you have a much higher chance of getting an interview no matter what they thought of your piece of paper. So it is still very much a who knows who world when getting to work. CVs are chronological, resumes most often the reverse, and we've already talked about the picture. If you are including a picture of yourself, then make it the same picture as your LinkedIn picture, so they have a sense of they saw the same person. You are introducing yourself as a person. So what does it take to get yourself there? And you certainly don't want to use a picture and then show up looking entirely different than that picture, because they have in their head who you are because of your LinkedIn or because of your others. So keep those things in mind. I would have to laugh because if I was going for a job, the picture that I'm still using, although it will be soon to be redone, that you see of me when I start my slides, it's an old one. It's getting to be a bit dated. So be aware of those things. All right, this is to me the most interesting part of this. The rest was sort of any recruiter could have told you, but I thought that coming to what makes a winning resume. And as I said, Google is very fond of getting themselves on the web, and they give themselves high ratings, and so it's easy to find good Google stories, and I think they're worth looking into. Winning resumes. I liked this glassdoor.com, by the way. It's one of the links I recommend, and that particular link will take you to this article in which the writer says, I would describe my, Glassdoor asked, it's an interview, an online interview, and Glassdoor asks how this person would describe their resume, and he said, I would describe my resume as detailed and accurate. By the way, it's very crammed. There is very little white space on this resume. When writing and editing my resume, I made an effort to make each of my experiences as clear and detailed as possible. While respecting the space limitations, I wanted the recruiter to have a good summary of what I did, including the technologies I've used and the skills required for those tasks. And then this was the sentence that I thought was very interesting. Putting these two things together, same person talking. Glassdoor asks, what narrative story did you want to convey? Now, if you think about your lives up through graduate school as a narrative story, you're telling the recruiter or the business how your narrative story fits their picture. And this is how this person did it. His primary emphasis was for this resume to make it clear that I'm someone with a deep technical background who is inherently entrepreneurial. Now, if you think about those two things, he understands Google. So he has been able to say, I fit, I have deep technical background, and I am inherently entrepreneurial. Since I know I fit, how am I going to make sure they know I fit? So to demonstrate deep technical knowledge with computer science, he emphasized research background, software development experience, and his selected independent projects allowed him to show his background as an entrepreneur by highlighting 2 contracted applications that he developed for organizations. Similarly, cite a business scholarship that I won at the bottom of my resume. Okay, so that should hopefully be giving some of your brains some click, click, click. How can I do that? What is my narrative story? What are the 2 or 3 things I want to make sure my people, the people who look at my document, see? And then how do I make it happen? So these are straight out of Google's recruiters. And I think all of them are good, no matter whether you're doing a CV or a resume. But if you're doing a resume, they're critical. So be aware that most of these people would see your stuff come in digitally. And if there were typos, boop, you're probably out of there. However, as they say, a more critical error won't get flagged by spell check. So most resume descriptions, according to Google recruiters and hiring experts, are too vague and too lengthy. So raise your hand if you've been working with one of these documents and you find it difficult to be concise. Those of you in the room, anybody having difficulty with conciseness? I have huge difficulty with it myself. When I talk about DoctoralNet as a company, it's very easy to talk about it all, and it's very easy to end up being vague rather than being explicit. So what they say is that these descriptions don't explicitly demonstrate how the candidates made things happen. How did you lead the project? How did you boost sales? Boost sales by how much? Give us some data. And how did you, if you saved the company money, how did you save the company money? Now, those are their examples. In an academic world, that would be the difference from saying I had a lab research assistantship to I had a lab research assistantship and we did so much work over such a period of time using such tools and came up with these kinds of results. So specificity, very important. Just as it is important if you're writing a doctoral or a master's thesis and you're coming up with your results. Explain why your wins are impressive. So 1 second place rather than 1 second place out of 50 teams with standout productivity tool. It'll get noticed because of the specificity, specifying a large number of others that you competed against successfully. That provides context and makes it clear whether or not you stand out in a competitive crowd. Okay, so competition is something worth considering in the academic world as well. So if you were published, is it a tier 1 journal? Don't expect your people to know that. How many, going back to the journal, your paper was published out in a journal that typically gets X number of pieces a year, and they publish X number. There's some kind of data there. See how you can tease that out, which leads us to showing how you stand it out in your individual attributes. You may be a member of something. Is that a selection? If so, how many participants? What is that you are a member of? Is it international? And if so, do you hold an office, or what do you do? Give some background. So Google would say selected as 275 participants nationwide, 12-month professional development program, high achieving diverse talent based on leadership potential and academic success. So that's a Google thing, and of course they're very much telling very explicitly why they're great. I mean, these people are competing under very hard chances, but you, and some of you may be from cultures where talking about yourself in such a kind of go get it way you may have been trained it was arrogant. You may have been trained it wasn't the way to be for a number of reasons. I know that's certainly true in Ireland. Irish person would have great difficulty writing those sentences the first time. But if you know where you are applying and you know what their culture is, that may be something that makes you say, do I really want to be part of that culture? And if I do, how do I step up to the mark at the beginning and understand how much self-aggrandizement I need and how specifically I need to make it? So the second version makes it clear it's about achievement and not about social. Although being about social is fine too. If they need to see that you're somebody who can work with people. And again, I'll get to some more things there. And then example 3, show you're a change maker. If you have in your lab increased productivity from X to Y, very important. If you worked in a group in your academic world and your group whereas the 1 out of 10 groups in your class that was acknowledged by your professor because of extra X, Y, and Z, and your leadership in that group contributed to that, these are the kinds of things that you can work out how to include. Now, I'm sure that by now many of you are thinking, how do I do this, or how do I do that? So we'll come quickly to that. Let me just, as you're going ahead and beginning to type out your questions, if you have some about you'd like to be able to do this and you'd like to do it for this population, how do we do that? We can brainstorm that next. And then there's some places you might want to go to go deeper. Looking again at our reflective questions from the beginning, to what extent do you know what the recruiters you face will be looking for? Well, the World Economic Forum tells us that there are 10 skills we all must have. And we did 10 webinars on them. 5 are cognitive and 5 are attitudinal. And we put them together in 2 box sets. So you can just click on those, sign up, get those box sets, and you'll be well up on looking seriously and quite deeply at what the skills require, and then you can think about your life and what things you have done show those skills and how you can put them in these documents. And I just want to say that if you are signing up for a box set or an opt-in and you don't receive an email within quickly, but definitely within 24 hours, please email us. A number of your universities are having difficulty getting things through your server. And so definitely use your university email first, but if it doesn't work, we'll figure out another way to get it sent to you. And the person that will help you there is Margie, M-A-R-G-I-E, at doctoralnet.com. I'm writing that in now, if you would capture her email, if you're interested in those box sets. We're doing some email tests right now, and we are seeing that some of your servers aren't letting the good stuff through. Now, how do you find out more? Interview skills for future employees would be just a really good thing to Google. And this Undercover Recruiter, it was a particularly good site for that. And then how do you prepare? Well, you prepare the same way you prepare for a Viva or your final defense as a master's capstone document. You do your research about what they're looking for. You find out other people who have done well. You ask them what the situation was like. You practice. You put out whatever you're doing for review. You get ideas back. You keep revising it until you are really happy, which means you don't put out your resume tomorrow for a job you just heard about. It's something you want to work ahead on. So that takes it through me today. And it's back to the people in the room. I'm going to shut the, I'll let the recording go for people who are watching by recording. We'll see what people come up with. Do you have questions, ideas? What's in your mind? And we'll discuss it. I think also one thing that is interesting to consider while you're typing is that less than 15% of the people currently in graduate school are expected to get academic jobs. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't get fabulous jobs, just that what is considered an academic job is changing. So one of the best, most outspoken person I've heard on the radio lately was a linguist, a PhD linguist who works for Google. So there are a lot of places. I noticed Christine is going for academic librarianship, but that can be many places, of course, other than just a campus. So what questions? Everybody's waiting for somebody else. How important are keywords? Great question, Gary. Probably not as important as they are for a publication. You're not putting you might, actually, that leads me into a whole piece of research I'll discuss for a second. Granvetter, Granvetter, I think, did a lot of research on how people get jobs. It's actually his research that started LinkedIn, or is the theoretical basis for LinkedIn, which is that we don't get jobs because of the people we know in our first round of contacts. We get jobs because of people who know us in our second and third round of contacts. So if you're looking for work, you really want to build your LinkedIn contacts, and you want to make sure that your second and third level contacts know that you're looking for work. And then you would put in keywords in that case rather strategically, because you'd be sending one kind of generic something, maybe. I guess what I want to say then is that keywords are important if you're putting it out on the web and you want it to show up. But if you're sending it to people, targeted personalization outweighs the general 16 to 1. Hope that's helpful. Introduction may be all they read on the resume. Put yourself in their shoes. Introduction, the same as your career objectives. Ashok, no, but it takes the same place. So when I looked at the templates for CVs and resumes, the ones that looked old school to me had this title, career objective. And I remember, and I'm in my 60s, so I remember career objectives being the title they used way back when. And I'm thinking that introduction, self-introduction, let me introduce myself, something like that is the current way of putting it. And what you want to do with that section is not talk about your career objectives, because that's looking at the world from your point of view, but you want to talk about yourself in a way that makes you a good fit for them, which is looking at the world from their perspective. These are, in the essence, a marketing document. So one of the things that, as we've developed our company, I realize is that when I send out an email and the subject line of the email tells you as a student what you're going to get out of attending this kind of professional development, you can easily say yes, no to it. And then the ones that tweak are the ones you come to. That's good communication. But at the same time, I could just as easily be writing about what is going to go on in that webinar, which is our point of view. And then you're not so interested and you don't come. I think that's actually a thread. It's a marketing idea, but I think it's a thread that holds very true for the world we are all moving into. I hope that's helpful. Gary, good that you came, and nice to see you again. And anybody who's dropping off, I hope it was useful to you. And we'll see you again in another one. But you're welcome to stay and chat for as long as you need to. So Kina, what are some of the tasks that we're doing in our research that are transferable skills for a resume? You mentioned work with data. Are there others? Yes. Tell me more about your research. And let me pull up, as you're typing in, let me pull up the World Economic Skills List. You're welcome, Pramod. Okay, so the skills, complex problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, people management, coordinating with others, emotional intelligence, judgment and decision making, service orientation, and there's a few others. You want to look at those skills, and hopefully if you get the box sets, the ones you're unsure of, I think in each case, Dr. Maria and I broke out what that might be in graduate school. So if you're doing research in the places you have to coordinate with others, the places where you had to think creatively, and for some of you, it might be, if you're in the social sciences, it might be how you got data, even when you weren't expecting to get data. Okay, so you do qualitative social science research, primarily looking at governments and policy stakeholder participation. Okay, disciplinary work with geographers and biologists. So people management, it's going to be something here, because you're working with people across a large part of that list is significant in how different some of those people see the world. So how did you manage it? How did you get them to give you the data? What coordination was necessary? Were there instances in that data gathering where your emotional intelligence really had to come out? And then how do you quantify that into, this is the hard part. This is the getting concise part. So you could probably tell me a story about something that was happening in an interview, or where coordination came into it, judgment and decision making and emotional intelligence. But it's difficult to put that in a one pager. So you might consider putting those things in putting those things in a chart. So you would have a heading, and you'd have things on the left that were the job, and things that on the right that were the skills. Then if the recruiter wanted to talk to you, you could you'd have room for discussion, remembering that these are documents not to tell your story, but to make them curious enough to bring you in because it looks like you're telling your story. Did I make sense there? I had a very clear picture, but I'm not sure. If not, please ask another question. Oh, very good. Very helpful. Excellent. So start with those box sets. They are really good about what we found when we did the 10 skills. It was true for both of us, is that each of these skills has lots to it. And when we put ourselves up against that standard, we think about ourselves differently. And when we think about ourselves differently, we put ourselves down on paper differently. So this is a process of self-discovery at the same time. And that actually makes it kind of more interesting and more fun and less like, oh, it's awful, I have to get a job, which is the downside of what this is. And with that, I'm going to turn off the recording, but that doesn't mean everybody can't stay around. We've probably done a pretty good job with our questions. So who else?